The gym was alive with noise that evening. The sound of gloves hitting pads, the echo of shouts and laughter filled the air. The fighters were warming up for sparring night, the most anticipated event of the week. At the center of it all stood Darius. Tall, strong, confident, with a smirk that never seemed to leave his face. He was the gym star fighter, undefeated in every local tournament and proud of it. Everyone admired his skill, but few liked his attitude. He walked around the mats like he owned them, cracking jokes, mocking newcomers, and calling out those who hesitated to spar with him. To Darius, fighting wasn't about discipline or respect. It was about proving he was better than everyone else. That night, a new face appeared at the door. A woman dressed in a plain gray hoodie, carrying a small gym bag. She moved quietly, almost unnoticed, slipping off her shoes and stepping inside. Her name was May. The coach greeted her warmly and introduced her to the group. Darius barely looked at her. When he finally did, he chuckled softly and said, "We're sparring, not stretching class, sweetheart." A few others laughed, but the coach frowned, warning him with a glance. May didn't react. She bowed politely and began warming up in silence. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like a dancer memorizing every breath. While others chatted and showed off, she stayed focused, eyes calm, steady, and distant. When it was time to pair up for sparring, the coach looked around. "Any volunteers to go first?" Darius raised his hand instantly. "Yeah, coach, let me take the new girl. She looks like she needs a light round." The room went quiet for a moment. Even the coach hesitated. But May looked up and nodded. "I don't mind," she said softly. Darius grinned, stretching his neck, rolling his shoulders like a predator preparing to play with its prey. They stepped onto the mat and bowed. He smirked. She stayed still, expression unreadable. The bell rang. Darius moved first, fast and confident. He threw a lazy jab, testing her distance. May didn't flinch. She simply shifted an inch to the side, her movement so subtle it was almost invisible. He tried again, faster this time, but she slipped away again. No panic, no noise, no wasted motion. Just calm control. The crowd began to murmur. Darius frowned, his pride poked. He stepped in harder this time, launching a kick meant to impress everyone watching. But May caught his leg midair and swept his other foot out from under him. He hit the mat before he even knew what happened. The gym went silent. Darius blinked up at the ceiling in disbelief. The quiet woman stood above him, her stance still and balanced. The coach hid a smile. "Round's not over," he called. Darius jumped back up, trying to shake it off. He threw a flurry of punches, this time fast, powerful. But May moved like water, flowing between every strike with impossible grace. Then, with one quick motion, she pivoted and tapped his shoulder, sending him off balance again. He stumbled, barely catching himself before falling. The room erupted in gasps. Darius's confidence cracked. His grin was gone, replaced by frustration. He lunged forward with all his strength, desperate to land just one clean hit. May ducked low, slid under his arm, and swept his legs again, this time holding him down gently with a simple grip. He froze, unable to move. Her voice was calm, quiet. "You rely on power. But power without control is nothing." She released him and stepped back, bowing respectfully. He stayed on the mat, breathing hard, humiliated but strangely silent. The crowd didn't cheer. They just watched her walk away quietly toward her bag as if nothing had happened. For the first time, Darius didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the mat. The sound of his own breathing loud in the quiet gym. The coach walked over and patted his shoulder. "Looks like you just learned something," he said softly. Darius didn't answer. He just looked toward May as she left the gym, her gray hoodie catching the faint glow of the lights. Something in her calm presence stayed with him. The memory of her balance, her patience, her control. It lingered longer than any punch he had ever taken. The next day, the gym was quieter than usual. Darius came in early, something he almost never did. The place smelled of mats and sweat, the sound of jump ropes hitting the floor echoing softly in the open space. He started warming up without saying a word to anyone. The coach noticed right away, but didn't comment. He had seen that look before, the mix of bruised pride and quiet reflection. Darius moved differently that morning. No swagger, no lazy grins, just focus. Every punch he threw hit the bag, with precision, every breath measured and steady. He wasn't trying to show off anymore, he was trying to understand. Later that day, May walked in wearing the same gray hoodie. The room went still for a moment. Some of the younger fighters glanced at Darius, curious about how he would react. He didn't say anything. Instead, he wiped the sweat from his face and walked toward her. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then Darius bowed slightly, his voice low and sincere. "Would you train with me?" he asked. May studied him for a moment, her calm eyes reading more than his words. Then she nodded quietly and stepped onto the mat. They began to move slowly, at first exchanging light motions. This time Darius didn't rush. He watched her carefully, the way she breathed, the rhythm of her steps. Each time he made a move, she countered it not with strength, but with timing. He began to see it, the subtle control, the balance, the patience in her technique. It wasn't about domination, it was about harmony. Between rounds, May spoke very little. When she did, her words were simple. "You fight too loud," she said once. "When your body moves, your mind should not shout. Let silence guide you." Her voice carried no judgment, only quiet certainty. And for the first time Darius listened. Days turned into weeks. They trained together, often the loud gym, slowly learning to move in rhythm with their silent lessons. The others began to notice changes in Darius. He no longer mocked anyone, he no longer showed off after sparring. His movements grew sharper, cleaner, filled with intent. One evening, as they finished a session, the coach walked over smiling. "Never thought I'd see the day you'd slow down, Darius," he said. Darius laughed quietly, not his usual cocky laugh, but a softer one. "Guess I finally met someone who could teach me." May gave a faint smile in return, her expression unreadable as always. She packed her gloves neatly into her bag and said, "You taught yourself, I only showed you where to look." The gym lights dimmed as night fell outside. Most of the fighters had gone home, leaving the quiet hum of fans and the faint creak of floorboards behind. Darius sat on the mat looking around the place he had once thought he owned. Now, it felt different. It wasn't his arena anymore, it was a place of learning, a space that belonged to everyone who stepped on those mats. May stood by the door, ready to leave. Before she stepped out, she looked back at him and said, "Remember, silence is not weakness, it's power resting." Her words lingered long after she was gone. And in that silence, Darius felt something he hadn't felt in years. Respect not demanded, but earned through humility. He looked at his reflection in the gym mirror. The fighter who stared back wasn't the same man who used to laugh at others. He was quieter, calmer, his eyes steady and clear. Outside, the street lights flickered softly. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. He stepped outside, breathing deeply, letting the calm sink in. For the first time, he realized the real fight had never been against anyone else. It had always been against the noise inside himself. Weeks turned into months, and the change in Darius became something everyone noticed. He still trained harder than anyone else, but now there was a quiet focus in him that drew people in instead of pushing them away. The arrogance that once surrounded him like armor had faded, replaced by a kind of stillness that carried strength of its own. New students began joining the gym, drawn by its reputation. And instead of mocking them, Darius became the one helping them find their rhythm. He corrected their form, taught them balance, showed them how to control their breathing. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. May watched these moments quietly from the corner of the gym. She never sought attention, never demanded recognition. She simply trained beside him day after day, her calm presence grounding the room like a steady heartbeat. One evening after training, most of the lights were off except the single one above the mats. The rain outside tapped gently against the windows. Darius sat cross-legged, wiping sweat from his face, while May stood near the mirror adjusting her wraps. "You ever compete?" he asked, breaking the silence. She looked at him through the mirror and said softly, "Not anymore." "Why not?" he asked, his voice curious, but respectful. She was quiet for a long time before answering. "Because fighting stopped feeling like fighting," she said. "It became noise, and I was searching for silence." Darius nodded slowly, understanding in a way he couldn't have months ago. He said, "I used to think winning was everything. Now I think balance is harder to earn than any medal." May turned and gave him a faint smile. Balance is the only fight worth having, she said. The gym door opened slightly, and the sound of wind filled the room. The coach stepped in, watching them both with a quiet smile. You two are becoming the calm in this place, he said. Then he added, the next tournament is coming up. You sure you don't want to enter, Darius? Darius glanced at May, then back at the coach. Maybe, he said, but not to prove anything. Just to test the quiet inside me. The coach nodded approvingly and left them to the silence again. Later, as Darius walked out into the cool night, the rain had stopped. The air was fresh and the streetlights reflected softly off the wet pavement. He pulled up his hood and looked back at the gym windows glowing faintly in the dark. Inside, he could see May still moving through her drills, slow, precise, balanced like water in motion. He watched for a moment, feeling something shift quietly inside him. He had come a long way from the man who mocked a quiet woman that night. And though he didn't know it, yet his journey with her had only begun. The morning of the tournament came with a soft chill in the air. The arena was crowded with fighters, coaches, and spectators, the energy thick with excitement and tension. Darius stood near the edge of the mat, stretching slowly, his focus calm, his breathing steady. He looked nothing like the man who used to strut into every match with a grin and a taunt. May stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her face as unreadable as ever. She wasn't competing, but she had come to watch. When Darius caught her eye, she gave a small nod, one that said more than words ever could. The announcer called his name, and the crowd began to cheer. His opponent was a tall, muscular fighter, known for his speed and aggression. He had won several matches that morning and carried himself with the same kind of arrogance Darius once had. They bowed to each other, and the match began. The opponent attacked first, sharp and fast, trying to dominate early. Darius moved like water flowing around each strike, calm and patient. Every time the opponent lunged, he found only air. The crowd murmured, watching the quiet precision in Darius's movements. He wasn't fighting with fury anymore. He was fighting with control. When the opening came, it was so small most didn't see it. A shift in weight, a pause in rhythm. Darius stepped in and swept his opponent to the ground, clean, effortless final. The referee called the match. The crowd erupted. But Darius didn't raise his arms or shout in victory. He bowed deeply, then helped his opponent up with quiet respect. May watched from the stands, her expression softening for the first time. She saw in his movements the reflection of every silent lesson she had taught him. After the match, Darius walked off the mat and found her waiting near the entrance. He said softly, "You were right, silence does guide you." May gave a faint nod. "You listened, that is what changed everything." They walked outside together, the sound of the crowd fading behind them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of gold and amber. For a long time neither spoke, they simply walked side by side through the quiet street. Darius finally said, "You know, I never asked how you learned to fight like that." May looked ahead, her eyes distant. "My father taught me," she said, "when I was young. He believed fighting was not about power, but about peace. He said if you ever have to use it, you already lost something." Darius listened in silence, letting her words sink deep. He thought about how far he had come and how far he still had to go. They reached a small park where the sound of wind moved through the trees. Children played in the distance, laughter mixing with the rustle of leaves. Darius looked at May and said, "Maybe one day you should teach a class. People could learn from you the way I did." She smiled faintly. "Maybe," she said, "but most people do not come searching for silence. They come searching for noise." He laughed softly. "Then maybe I'll help them find it," he said. They sat on a bench as the last light of day began to fade. And for the first time in a long while, Darius felt completely still. The noise that once ruled his world had finally gone quiet. As the days passed, the bond between Darius and May grew stronger. They trained together almost every morning before the gym filled up. Their sessions were quiet, measured, the rhythm of their movements blending like music without sound. Sometimes the coach would watch from a distance, shaking his head in quiet pride, knowing something rare was taking shape on those mats. Word of Darius's transformation spread quickly. New students started coming not to see the cocky fighter who once ruled the gym, but the calm, disciplined man who now taught control through stillness. They called him the silent fighter, a name he never asked for, but one that seemed to fit.
May still stayed out of the spotlight.
She guided with patience, teaching through example, never through instruction. When the others struggled, she simply moved beside them, showing them how to breathe, how to let tension fade, how to flow instead of forcing. One afternoon, a group of fighters from another gym arrived for a sparring exchange. Among them was a young man named Rico, fast, loud, and arrogant. He laughed too much, talked too big, and reminded everyone of how Darius used to be. During warm-ups, Rico pointed toward May and whispered to his friends. "That quiet woman looks like she doesn't belong here," he said, grinning. Some of the gym members glanced toward Darius, unsure how he would react. He said nothing. He only stood up, tied his belt calmly, and said, "Spar with me first." The match began, and Rico charged forward full of energy. His strikes were wild, but powerful, his confidence unshaken. Darius moved smoothly, never rushing, never pushing too hard. Every motion was measured, every dodge graceful, as if guided by invisible rhythm. Rico grew frustrated, throwing faster, harder, but Darius barely seemed to move. Then, in one breath of motion, Darius swept his leg, and the younger man hit the mat before he even understood what happened. The room fell silent. Weeks rolled into months, and the gym slowly transformed into something entirely new. The noise that once filled it with shouts and ego had faded, replaced by quiet focus and mutual respect. People trained harder, but calmer, their movements balanced and mindful. Even the air felt different, as if the space itself had learned to breathe. Darius now helped lead warm-ups every morning. He no longer barked orders or showed off. Instead, he guided with steady patience, the same way May once guided him. He had become the anchor of the gym, the calm at its center. One day, while class was ending, May approached him with a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I will be leaving for a while," she said simply. Darius looked at her, surprised. "Leaving where?" "My hometown," she answered. "There is a small school there that needs someone to teach the children self-defense. They asked me to help for a few months." Darius was silent for a long moment. The thought of the gym without her felt strange. "When do you go?" he asked quietly.
"Tomorrow morning," she said.
He nodded slowly, trying to hide the heaviness in his chest. "You think they need you more than we do," he said, trying to smile. May looked at him with calm eyes. "You do not need me anymore," she said. "You have learned what you came here for." He wanted to argue, but he didn't. He knew she was right. The next morning, the gym was still dark when Darius arrived. May was already there, a small bag slung over her shoulder, her hair tied back as always. They stood for a while in silence, neither knowing what to say. Finally, Darius spoke. "Thank you for everything." May gave him a small nod. "Remember what you learned," she said. "When things become loud, listen for the quiet beneath it. It will always show you the way." Then she turned and walked out the door, her step soft and steady, until she disappeared down the street. For a long time, Darius stood there staring at the door. The gym felt different without her presence, like a calm river waiting for the wind to return. Days passed, then weeks, but her influence never left. Her voice seemed to echo through every corner of the room, guiding every breath, every movement. Darius often caught himself repeating her lessons to others, using the same quiet tone she once used with him. One evening after class, he sat on the mat alone, the sound of the city faint beyond the windows. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the stillness settle in his chest. In that silence, he could almost hear May's voice again, soft and steady, reminding him of everything she had taught. He smiled quietly and whispered to the empty room, "I am still listening." Months passed, and though May was gone, her presence lingered like the calm after a storm. The students often asked Darius about her. "When will she come back?" they would say, their voices filled with genuine respect. Soon, he would answer with a faint smile, though he never truly knew. The gym thrived under his guidance. He had turned it into a place of discipline and quiet power where no one mocked or boasted. Even visiting fighters from other schools spoke of the atmosphere as something rare and grounding. Every morning before the doors opened, Darius trained alone. He moved through forms and patterns that May had once shown him, repeating them like a meditation. Each motion carried memory, each breath carried purpose. Sometimes after training, he would sit by the open window and watch the sunrise above the city. He wondered what May was doing, if she was still teaching, if she thought of their time together. He didn't realize how much she had changed him until he began teaching others and heard her lessons echoing in his own voice. One evening, after a long day of classes, he was locking up when he noticed someone standing by the door. The light from the street cast a soft glow on the familiar face.
May.
She stood there wearing her same gray hoodie, her calm expression unchanged. For a moment, Darius couldn't speak. Then he smiled and said, "I was starting to think you forgot where this place was." She stepped inside the gym, looking around slowly. "You kept it the same," she said quietly. "I kept it the way you built it," he replied. They stood there in the quiet hum of the empty gym. The silence between them was not awkward, it was full of meaning, of things understood without words. "How was the school?" he asked. "The children are strong," she said, smiling faintly. "They learned quickly, but they reminded me of you, impatient at first and full of noise." Darius laughed softly, shaking his head. "I guess I deserved that," he said. "You learned," she said, "and that is what matters." He looked at her for a long moment. "This place feels right again, now that you're here." May glanced around at the neatly stacked mats and the soft lights. "It was never the place," she said. "It was the people who learned to listen." They trained together again that night, just like before. Their movements flowed in rhythm, the room filled with the sound of bare feet on mats and the soft rhythm of breath. There was no crowd, no applause, just balance. When they finished, they sat side by side against the wall, watching the stillness of the empty gym. Outside, the night air drifted in, cool and calm. For the first time in a long while, neither of them needed to say anything at all. The next morning, the gym felt different. The students were already there, warming up quietly, their movements focused, their energy steady. Darius and May entered together, their presence bringing a calm that filled the whole room. Everyone had seen the exhibition match the night before, and the story had spread through the city. People spoke not about who won or lost, but about how the match made them feel. They said it was like watching two elements dance, earth and wind, balance and motion. Darius noticed how the students trained with more awareness now. They no longer rushed through drills or tried to show off their strength. Instead, they moved with intent, each motion deliberate, each breath in rhythm. After the session ended, one of the younger students approached Darius. "How do I fight like you?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Darius smiled softly. "Do not try to fight like me," he said. "Try to listen like May." The boy turned to May, who stood near the window, wrapping her gloves slowly. She met his eyes and said quietly, "If you learn to be still, you will hear everything you need." The boy nodded, though he did not yet understand fully. But one day he would. Later that evening, when everyone had gone, Darius and May sat on the mat in silence. The golden light from the setting sun poured through the high windows, covering the floor in long, warm streaks. "Do you ever miss competing?" Darius asked softly. May thought for a moment. "No," she said. "I think we are still competing, just not against others." He looked at her, curious. "Then who are we fighting?" She turned her gaze toward the fading light. "The noise," she said. "The noise inside that tells us we must always prove something." Darius was quiet, letting her words settle. He knew exactly what she meant. For a while they sat there in the fading light, neither moving, neither speaking. Then Darius stood and walked to the door, turning off the lights one by one. The gym fell into soft darkness, filled only with the faint sound of their breathing. When he turned back, May was still sitting on the mat, her eyes closed, her expression peaceful. He smiled quietly, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Outside, the sky was deep blue, with the first stars beginning to show. The city buzzed in the distance, but in that small space, there was only silence, calm and balance. The kind of silence that was no longer empty, but full of life. The weeks that followed became the calmest time the gym had ever known. Darius and May continued to teach side by side, their lessons spreading beyond the walls of that small place. Fighters came from other towns just to watch them train, to understand how two people could move with such quiet harmony. Each student who walked through the doors learned that strength was not in shouting or showing off. It was in patience and awareness, in respect for oneself and for others. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the buildings, Darius stood by the window watching the golden light fade across the mats. May was standing near the center of the room, her hands folded quietly, her gaze soft and distant. The students had all gone home, leaving behind the still hum of silence that had become their tradition. Darius turned to her and said, "You know, May, I used to think the mat was a place for fighting. Now I see it as a place for finding yourself." May smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the last trace of sunset. "You found yourself long ago," she said. "You just had to listen." The light dimmed until the room was bathed in calm twilight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then May stepped forward and bowed deeply, her motion slow and graceful. Darius bowed in return, his heart steady and full of peace. When they straightened, their eyes met, and no words were needed. Everything that had to be said was already understood. They turned off the lights and walked out together into the quiet night. The street was empty, the air cool, the city soft around them. As they walked side by side, Darius glanced up at the stars and felt a sense of calm he had never known before. The arrogance, the anger, the noise that once ruled his heart were gone. All that remained was balance. And beside him walked the woman who had taught him that silence could be stronger than any punch and deeper than any victory. Their footsteps faded into the night. Two fighters no longer searching for battles, but walking in peace with the quiet they had both earned.